Being a trucker means constant travel. Constant travel means constant change, and constant change means constant danger. This was something I had to accept when I took the job all those years ago. But back then I thought that nothing would ever happen to me. There was no chance of me running into danger. I was completely invincible behind the wheel of my rig. But hell, was I wrong. I'd crossed the state border a while ago, and my eyes were starting to get heavy. I hadn't seen anyone else on the roads for miles, and I was getting bored of listening to chat show after chat show. Suddenly, the truck started slowing down. I put my foot down harder on the pedal, but it had no effect. I shook myself wide awake and sat up. My truck rolled a few more meters, then came to a halt. I just sat there for a minute, confused, before I unclipped my belt and climbed out. I quickly came to the realization that I had run out of fuel. I was pretty pissed at myself for not paying more attention, and thinking about it, I did hear the warning bleep some time ago. I was about to call my boss when I heard a voice from behind me. I span round real fast, holding my phone as if it were a weapon. The man slowly approaching me looked to be in his early 40s, with greying hair and a moustache. He seemed to be chewing a lump of tobacco and walking with a slight limp. "Looks like you've run out of gas," he croaked, still approaching me. I shrugged and told him that I'd fine and started to walk back towards the truck. "I got a place not so far from here where I could get you some fuel." I didn't believe him. Too many things didn't add up. Why was he out here, at this location, at this time, just as I broke down? I said that I already had some in the back and I didn't need any help. I got in and locked the doors. I just wanted this man to go away. I saw him walk off into the tree line and disappear. I called my boss and he said he'd sent someone out to tow me, but they might take some time. I ended up falling asleep where I sat, feeling much more secure with my doors locked and the man gone. I woke up some time later and realized that I was moving. I was confused at first, but then remembered that someone had been sent to tow the truck. I wondered why they didn't wake me up, but maybe they tried. I'm a deep sleeper and the doors were locked. I noticed that it was still dark outside and tried to work out where we were on the map. I couldn't see any signs along the side of the road and had no clue where I was. I opened the window and shouted round to the tower. "Where are we going? Why hadn't he just taken me to the garage?" After a while, we appeared to be on a very rural road, almost like we were driving through a forest. In the distance, there was a large barn we seemed to be heading towards. I couldn't get the attention of the tower, so called my boss to see what was going on. He sounded extremely puzzled and said the tower wasn't due to arrive at my location for another hour. I was losing it and shouted at my boss, "Then who the hell is towing me?" My boss called the police and told me to try and get out of the vehicle. I didn't need telling twice. I swung open the door and jumped out. I was winded and lay there for a moment. The tow truck then stopped. The tower must have heard the sound of the door. I got up immediately and ran. I had no clue where I was and chose a random direction. Looking over my shoulder, I saw him and immediately recognized the face. It was the man from earlier. He spat a mound of tobacco out of his mouth and jumped out of the truck. I ran faster and faster, but then I heard the noise of a gunshot ring out. I hit the floor and crawled behind the nearest tree, terrified. The man was walking fast now and shouting for me to come out. He didn't see exactly where I went, but he probably had a pretty good idea. I managed to drag myself behind a log, breathing as quietly as I could. The man was getting closer, calling, "Turn yourself in, and it'll be quick." I couldn't move any more now. He would hear me. The man stopped right next to my log, looked around, and ran off in another direction. I breathed a sigh of relief and looked out. The man was about 100 meters away, and looking right at me, I bolted for the truck and made it underneath, the sound of bullets slamming against the metal. I had nowhere to run, and he was here. Just as I thought it was all over, I heard the sound of sirens. The man swore and ran off into the wood. I climbed out from under the truck and met the officers that had arrived. 2 of them had already run off after the man. They asked me what had happened and took me back to the station for questioning. I answered all of their questions and told them about the barn I was being towed to. It was inspected and sealed off. When asking what they found, I was told that it was best I didn't know. I can only imagine what would have happened to me if I had stayed in the truck. However, I do know one thing: that man is still on the loose, and I can only pity the poor soul who runs into him next. From a young age, I was told to never talk to strangers, and through my childhood I never did. However, in adult life, things change. There is more reason to talk with people you don't know, especially when lonely. When I became a truck driver, the long and empty roads got the better of me, and I'd start giving lifts to hitchhikers who were going to the same place I was. It was the perfect solution for my loneliness, and often I would become friends with the people I gave lifts to. My job was absolutely perfect until that one November night. I had dropped off my cargo at the designated warehouse and was on my way back to the depot. It was going to be a long drive through the night. A few hours into the drive, I saw a man at the side of the road with a black bag and a plaque reading the exact same place I was going. Usually past a certain time I would ignore it and continue my journey, but something about this man made me feel like I owed it to him, and I could do with some company on the journey anyway. I pulled over, opened my window, and asked him where he was going, even though I had already read the sign. He just pointed at his plaque and looked up at me. Something about him made me uneasy, but it was too late now, and I told him to hop in. This was a huge mistake. The man climbed in and sat in the passenger seat. He was dressed completely in black, with a silver chain spilling out of the top pocket of his overcoat. At first I was hesitant, then I got myself together and shook his hand. It was cold. Very cold. Not the kind of cold when it has been chilly outside, but the kind when someone has a fever, a wet, clammy, unnatural cold. I looked at his face. He looked like he was in his late 50s, with a grey beard and harsh eyes that put you in your place. I cleared my throat and introduced myself. He sent back a rough mumble that didn't sound like a name. All I said was, "Pleased to meet you," and got back onto the road. I decided it best not to try and talk too much to the man unless he talked first. He didn't look like the kind of guy that you'd want to say the wrong thing to. After a couple of minutes, I began to notice how he was constantly rummaging inside the bag. It was making a rather unnerving clinking sound of metal hitting other metal. After around an hour of driving, the man had not stopped rummaging inside the bag. I had also noticed that he had been staring at me for some time, which was creeping me out massively. It really made my skin crawl. On most occasions, if I have a passenger who is not particularly communicative, I would put the radio on, but mine had stopped working last week, and I still needed to get it fixed. In an effort to stop him staring at me, I asked him, "What's in the bag?" I immediately regretted it. He looked right at me and said in a raspy voice, "Mind your own business." I was slightly shocked by this and tried to pass it off as a bit of a sarcastic joke, although I knew for sure it wasn't. Throughout the journey, the rummaging got louder and louder, and he started making stranger noises in an extremely low tone. I was so unsettled, I began thinking of what to do. I could not go another 3 hours with this man in my truck. He was now clanging whatever was in his bag very hard. He then stopped and started scraping what sounded like a knife against something else. I had enough and pulled into the side of the road. I didn't want to confront this guy, but I asked him once more, "What's in the bag?" Once again he responded with, "Mind your own business." I nodded and said that we had a puncture on the back tire and asked him if he'd mind checking it out whilst I got the repair kit. He looked at me with a look of complete hatred, then got out of the truck and went round the back. I put my foot on the gas and drove. I saw him in my taillights stare after me with what looked like a smile spread across his face. His hands looked like they were covered in blood. I still see that image every time I close my eyes. I made it back to the depot, trying desperately to forget the man. Then I realized he had left his bag. Obviously, I could not help but look in it, but I wish I hadn't. The bag was full of different metal objects, all of them looking like some kind of torture device. From knives and shackles to ropes and bars. I then realized they were all covered in blood. I don't know why I didn't turn the bag in to the police, but I thought that because it had my fingerprints on, it would not end well for me. I took the bag home and did some more searching through it, and to my horror, at the bottom of the bag was a picture of my truck, a picture of the registration, and a picture of me holding the bag. I could hardly sleep, but in the end, I managed to get a few hours. I definitely couldn't go to the police now. It looked like the bag belonged to me, but I decided that I had to. I put the bag in a box and was about to walk out of the door when I noticed something. The picture of me holding the bag was nailed into the door with a note attached. All it read was, "Mind your own business." I have been a truck driver for some time now, and I have experienced many things on the road. Some have stayed with me for years, whilst some will probably stay with me forever. One of these experiences will for sure stay with me until the day I die. I had been placed on a very long journey, taking a load 10 hours cross-county. There was nothing but dreadful music on the radio, and I was beginning to get tired. It had got dark some time ago, and was now extremely late. I decided to call in for the night at the next motel I came across. I didn't even care if it was a bad one. I now really wish I had. I pulled up and looked around. The place looked awful. The paint was peeling off the walls, the windows were dirty, and there were multiple letters missing from the sign. The strangest part was that there were no cars in the parking lot. On any other occasion I'd have taken that was a strong warning to stay away. But I'd been driving all day and did not have the energy to get back in the truck and drive somewhere else. I went over to the reception and there was no one there. I rang the bell and still no one came. I waited a few more minutes, repeatedly ringing the bell. Annoyed, I turned round and began to walk away. But then I heard a voice. I looked round to see an elderly man with very few teeth grinning up wildly. He welcomed me to the motel and asked me if he could be of assistance. I told him that I needed a room for the night and that I'd like a room with a view of my truck. I always ask this at quiet motels. It just makes me feel more secure for some reason. He fumbled around for a bit and then threw me a key with a room number on it. I paid him up front because I'd be setting off early in the morning. As I was walking up the stairs, I heard him say in a muffled tone, "You have a great night's sleep." He then chuckled to himself quietly. This should have creeped me out, but I was far too exhausted to care. The first thing I noticed when I entered my room was that it was not facing my truck, like I'd asked. Instead, just the dumpsters on the other side of the building. The bed was comfy and the room was big, but I couldn't help but feel that something wasn't right. There were stains on the carpet, dark stains. The walls were covered in marks, and there was something in a plastic bin bag in the bath. I couldn't tell what it was, but it was big. I lifted the top to see in, and I was almost sick. Inside was the head of a pig, not nicely severed like a butcher would do, but a deep, rough cut. This was absolutely disgusting, but as the walls were crawling with cockroaches anyway, I decided it best not to use the shower or the bath and drew the curtain across. I tried to forget about what I had seen. I awoke not to the sound of my alarm clock, but the sound of voices outside my room. It was 2 a.m. Who would be out of bed at that time? I just assumed it was another guest and tried to get back to sleep, but before I could, I heard the unmistakable sound of a key in the lock. I flew out of bed and into the bathroom and immediately hid in the tub, trying to ignore the pig's head that lay next to me. The curtain was drawn across, but I could see a small amount through a moth-eaten hole in the curtain. I heard the door swing open and the sound of footsteps as someone entered the room. I peeked through the hole to see a man in a ski mask walk over to my bed. He had something in his hand. The man threw off the covers and cursed. I then heard the voice of the man from the reception whisper, "What's wrong?" The man in the ski mask responded, "He's not here. He must have left earlier than we thought he would." I then saw the man start leaving, and a huge amount of relief washed over me. Then he stopped, turned around, and walked straight into the bathroom. It felt like my heart had stopped beating. I tried to flatten myself into the bottom of the tub, although I knew it wouldn't do much good. He stood there for a good few minutes. I then heard the man cough, spit something into the sink, and leave. When I was sure that they were gone, I got out, grabbed my bag and left. I used the emergency exit at the side of the building. I ran round to my truck and got in, started the engine and drove. As I was leaving, I saw someone in the window staring at me, grinning his nasty, toothless grin. I didn't look back and got out of there. I'd driven nearly 20 miles when I was pulled over by a highway patrolman. He asked me if I was aware my back doors were hanging open. I told him no and went to check it out. A large amount of my load had been stolen and many other boxes had been slashed open. I told the patrolman everything about the motel and what had happened to me. He shook his head in disbelief and told me something that made me gasp. That motel 20 miles up road, the owner died there 4 years ago and it's been abandoned ever since.